the church is answering questions that the world isn't asking. And so that creates this divide. It creates this massive chasm. And I think especially over the last 5 to 10 years, that chasm has just grown exponentially. And I think there's just so many Christians that go to church, that love Jesus, but are so caught up in their bubble, Christian bubble, and they're completely oblivious to what's happening. And I was that person, and I was in ministry, I was in leadership. And I realized that as I took a break from ministry about 2 years ago now. And it's been these last 2 years that I really realized like how out of touch I was with what's happening in this world. All right, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Tat2d Preacher podcast. This is episode number 14. I hope you are all doing awesome today. Well, over the last 5 or 6 episodes, I've talked about the unseen realm, and I've talked about the complexity that is the unseen realm, talking about how there's so much more going on, so much more than we realize. How we are, as humans, affected more than we realize with what's happening there. And how it's a lot more than just angels and demons. There's so many more creatures at play, so many more beings that exist. And I've just felt like I just feel the burden and have felt the desire and the passion to just share about that and talk about the significance and the importance of it. And I'm going to continue to do so. But one of the main pieces of feedback that I've received from so many of you has come in the form of a question, which is, what's the point? How does talking about aliens help me in my relationship with Jesus? How does talking about the unseen realm help me grow in my faith? Like, what is the point? And so I attempted to answer this question, I think back in episode 11 or episode 12, but I didn't really provide a lot of background detail. I didn't really share, a lot of my heart with why I really believe what I believe and what kind of led me to led me to where I'm at today and why I'm so passionate about talking about it. And so I thought, you know what? It's time to make a full episode about this, addressing it once and for all, because I keep getting this question over and over again, which, again, I'm super thankful for all the engagement, all the questions, all the feedback, all the messages, everything. But because I keep getting this question, and I actually think it's an important question, it's a super important question to answer, because it's one that it's so relevant to each one of us, and I think more so than we know. And so that's why I wanted to take an entire episode and just devote it to this subject. And so that's where we're going today. I hope that interests you, and if it does, you're going to want to stick around. But before we get there, I just want to quickly mention, if you haven't already, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube at the same handle. It's the Tat2d Preacher. Links will be in the description below. And also, if you are listening to this on Apple Podcasts, if you could please leave a 5-star review and drop a comment, that would be amazing. That would just help me get this podcast out into the podcasting world. Well, that's my shameless social media plug. So now let's get to episode 14. It's going to be a good one. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Okay, so what is the point? Why does talking about aliens, or how does talking about aliens, how does talking about angels and demons, how does talking about territorial spirits, how does talking about conspiracy theories, how does talking about social issues, cultural issues, how does talking about any of this stuff really help us in our walk with God, really help us draw closer to God and become stronger in our faith? So starting off, before I get to the heart of the answer, I did want to quickly address something that I've received a lot on in my DMs this last little bit. And it's tied to the answer to the question. It's all connected, but I did want to just specifically highlight this part, and that is my social media content change. Um, when I first started posting on social media regularly, like this was back in October 2021. I had Instagram and TikTok, but I, barely posted. And if I did, it was just for family and friends and things of that nature. Had no desire to be any kind of a quote unquote influencer or had any desire to put out stuff for the world to see. But where I was at personally and what I was going through emotionally, and it was a rough place, I used social media as kind of therapy. And so it just kind of helped me process my own emotions. And so I began just putting out just encouraging content like scripture verses, prayers, inspirational quotes, just stuff that would bring hope and life and encouragement because, so many people were, and still are going through a rough time. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going through a rough time. Maybe we can help each other out. And so I began putting out this stuff and just all of a sudden getting so much engagement, so much feedback, so many messages from people all over the world saying, "Hey Joel, thanks so much for your messages or for your video. It really touched me. That prayer was really hit me where I was at," and all this kind of stuff. And so I was stunned and shocked and humbled and honored, and just to kind of see the growth and just the influence that my little videos were having. And so I did that solid for about 12 or 13 months. And that's the only content that I did. And, it was amazing. But then so then that was October 2021, then December 2022. So a few months ago now, um, I, I began to not shift my content, but just add other kinds of content to what I was already doing. And so this is what a lot of you have picked up on, and you've let me know. You've seen me now talk about or put out content talking about politics, social issues, conspiracy theories, and then a lot of stuff talking about the unseen realm, aliens, just different creatures that people are having encounters with, all this kind of stuff. I've added all of that to what I'm already putting out. And a lot of you are wondering why, or some of you have voiced your concern with the content change and the content choices. And so again, this is what has led me to make this episode and to talk about why the content has changed or why I've added a lot of that content to my channel now. And so I did want to highlight the fact that I got all your messages. I see them and I'm aware that my content has changed. And I just want to acknowledge that I see that you see that it's changed too. So that being said, here's where I want to start. So I have a huge heart for the church. I've been around the church my entire life. My dad was a pastor. My uncles were pastors. My grandparents were pastors. I myself have been to Bible college. I've pastored to various levels and degrees in churches. I've been, working in a church for probably half of my life, and I'm 40 years old. So half of my life is spent in and around, like working in the church, not just attend. And so I love the church. I feel, back when I was 17 is when I fully gave my life to Jesus. And from the ages of 17 to 20, God radically spoke to me and called me, and in various ways let me know, or I should say instill within me a passion for ministry, a passion to reach people for Jesus. And I feel like I am called to the church. And so I have a heart for the church. I'm not an anti-church person. But one of the things that I've noticed in my experience with the church, especially in the last, I want to say 5 to 10 years, I feel like the church has become they're not in tune with what's happening in the world. I think a lot of times church, it becomes very cliquey, if you're in the church, then everything makes sense. All the topics, it's familiar. But if you're not in the church, the gap between the unbeliever and the church has become more and more separated. The church is answering questions that the world isn't asking. And so that creates this divide. It creates this massive chasm. And I think especially over the last 5 to 10 years, that chasm has just grown exponentially. And I think there's just so many Christians that go to church, that love Jesus, but are so caught up in their bubble, Christian bubble, and they're completely oblivious to what's happening. And I was that person, and I was in ministry, I was in leadership. And I realized that as I took a break from ministry about 2 years ago now. And it's been these last 2 years that I really realized like how out of touch I was with what's happening in this world. Again, it's because it's so easy to get caught up in your little bubble when you're in church. And for me personally, I mean, there are Christians who go to church who have interests in politics and interests in cultural issues and all that. But I think so many Christians just don't. And I was one of them. And so I was super out of touch. And it hasn't, and it's only been since I've been out of church ministry, vocational ministry, and where I've been putting a lot of my time and my effort now into social media. And I've exchanged the traditional pulpit on a church stage to social media, whether it's Instagram, whether it's TikTok, whether it's YouTube, whether it's podcast. And it's only been since I've done that I've really realized, like, oh my goodness, like there's so much more going on in this world than we realize, that Christians realize. Like there's so much more stuff happening. And there's millions and millions of people that are struggling with things, wrestling with things, that have questions about things that the church won't even touch with a 10-foot pole. And it's that situation that I've just felt this burden to address. So I have a heart for the church, and of course I want to be encouraging and give messages of life and hope, and I do have a passion for that. Like I love leading people, and I mean in a few days I'm speaking at one of my best friends' youth group, and my whole purpose of going there is just to help them connect with Jesus and help them encounter Jesus, and to let them know that he's real and that he loves them, and that you can actually have a tangible experience and encounter with him, that God is real. And so like that's my heart, and I love that, and I love leading other people into that. But there's a whole other, I think, path, if you will, of understanding about our culture and our world that so many Christians are just oblivious to. And this is why there's been this massive shift in the content that I'm putting out, that I'm engaging in and engaging with, because I want to fill that gap, or help to fill that gap between the church and the world, by talking about things that the church isn't talking about. The church is not talking about aliens, but the world is. You look at, the governments all over are talking about it. Like, things that were considered conspiracy stuff 15 years ago is now in the mainstream media as normal. Like, there are millions and millions of people that have questions about this stuff, including Christians. There are people having encounters and experiences with aliens. And where does a Christian go with those questions, with those experiences? Because they can't come to church. And so I've heard like countless stories now from real people who've had real experiences and voiced their hurt and voiced their concern because they felt like they had nowhere else to go. And that's just one example. That's just one example. My heart is there's so much more going on that I think the church needs to be aware of. There's so much more going on, and if the church doesn't catch up, that gap, that chasm is just going to get bigger and bigger. And they're going to have all these people start looking elsewhere for answers, and it's just going to lead them further and further away from God. And so I just that's my heart. Like that's the foundation for why I'm talking about what I'm talking about, whether it's on this podcast. And again, I've just started this podcast. There's so much more to go, and there's so much more things that I want to talk about and get into. But why a lot of you are seeing on my social media the content change, because I think that for me personally, like I believe fully that I've been called to ministry. I mean, I've been in ministry for years, but I feel like this is just the next, for me personally, just the next phase or the next step in kind of how I want to help influence the church and how I want to help influence Christians. And so I don't see this as something that I'm taking lightly. It's not clickbait. You know, I received a ton of comments from people just saying, "Oh, you're just posting these things because you want people to click on them, just because you want to get views, just because you." And it's like, man, I am not posting these videos for that purpose. I'm posting these videos because they're actually reaching people and addressing issues that are actually on people's minds and hearts. It's not for clickbait. It's not just to get more views. And so, coming from a Christian perspective, coming from someone who's been in the church, been around the church for their whole lives, I really believe that we have to start approaching we have to start thinking outside the box of what traditional ministry looks like. It can't be the same old, because that's not working anymore. That style or again, I think that a lot of the things that the church is doing today is they're answering questions that the world isn't asking. And so that gap is huge. And so the way I think we approach ministry and the way that we handle certain topics and certain ideas, certain experiences that people are having, the way we address this stuff, I think it's going to have to change. Because especially as we get closer to the quote unquote end, I mean, every generation thought their generation was the last one. You know, there are things that happened in every generation that would cause people to believe that, hey, maybe Jesus is coming back now. Everyone dealt with stuff, but I think there's things happening now in our world, in our time today, that hasn't happened before, or at least not in this way or on this level. And I think that that right there should tell us that maybe we got to start preaching the Bible, preaching the full counsel of God, but using the Bible to address stuff that's happening in our world today. Stuff that maybe the church has stayed away from. Because there's millions of people out there that have questions, that are going through stuff that the average Christian couldn't even comprehend. I mean, I've heard so many stories of experiences that Christians are having, experiences that I should just say people are having that would rock your world, would shatter your paradigm, where you couldn't process what you're hearing. And it's like the church isn't prepared to handle those kind of things, to deal with those kind of situations, to deal with those kind of experiences. And so this is why I feel burdened for this. This is why I'm talking about the stuff that I'm talking about. This is why I feel burdened about this, because I want Christians to understand that there's so much more happening. When we look at our world and we talk about issues like transhumanism, when's the last time you heard a message on a Sunday morning preached on transhumanism? But this is massive. What's happening right now? The technology that's being developed or has been developed, and what the agenda is here, the transhuman agenda. Like that, I mean, this is a whole other number of podcasts in and of itself. But like, this is the kind of stuff that you won't find in a church, you won't hear about in church. But it's right now, it's kind of the next big thing that's going to hit our world. And I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I've listened to a lot of interviews and read a whole bunch of stuff from really smart people, from scientists, from people in that space, talking about how, they believe that they can cause the human life expectancy to go on forever. That you can genetically modify your body, turn it into something else. That way you could live forever. This is what transhumanism is doing right now. And it's a real thing. And it's something that's going to affect every Christian. But we're not talking about that. The implications of that. The subject, again, I've already hit on it, but aliens. Like this is normal stuff now. And this is not conspiracy anymore. Like the governments have already let the cat out of the bag. UFOs, UAPs, they're known now. There's no hidden secret anymore. There's stuff is definitely flying around up there. Some of it could be man-made. There's a good chance that a lot of it's not man-made. It's coming from somewhere else. Where is that? What does that look like? What does that mean? You look at the abduction phenomenon. Millions of people have been abducted all over the world who don't know each other. The whole thing can't be a lie. Can't be all made up. Christians have claimed to be abducted. Yet, when do you hear that talked about in the church? Well, you don't. Conspiracy theories in terms of the elite society of the world, you want to talk about the Illuminati, you want to talk about the entertainment industry, you want to talk about what happens behind the scenes there. You want to talk about politics, you want to talk about government, you want to talk about the shady stuff that happens there. The stuff that's going on behind the scenes with our world leaders, the stuff that they're doing, things that they're involved with. I mean, it's no coincidence that my biggest video is about the fact that is Biden a clone. Like that's a real thing. And there's so much stuff out there on that. But think about that for a second. Like this is a real topic. he's a clone? What if he is? What if he is a clone? What if they have that technology to do that? Like, just think about the implications of that and how that affects our everyday life. These are topics that you won't hear about. Talking about this kind of technology that exists out there that's very real or potentially very real. And it's like, as the church, we're so focused on 5 ways to live a better life, three benefits for being in community, or here's 10 different ways that you can help to read your Bible better, or like there's stuff that we're talking about that in and of itself is good, but it's not addressing some of the real stuff that's actually happening in our world that's affecting so many people. And I'm burdened for this stuff, these topics, these ideas, these things that I see, that I'm learning about, that I'm discovering. And it's like, someone's got to talk about them. We have to address it. We can't just pretend like we can't just become naive to it. We can't just become ignorant to it. We can't just pretend like these things aren't happening. I mean, I think as Christians, we forget. We just choose to, not acknowledge what's actually happening in our world. When you want to talk about sex trafficking, you want to talk about just like there's so much stuff going on. And then you want to add into the unseen realm, territorial spirits, fallen angels, demons, other creatures that are impacting our world. And it's like, man, I don't know. I feel like I cannot not talk about this stuff anymore. I can't ignore it anymore. I can't pretend like it doesn't exist anymore. It's just, I got to figure out, I want to bridge that gap. And so this is the reason why I'm doing this. This is the reason why I'm talking about what I'm talking about and what I'm going to talk about, especially in this podcast. This is why. Because I think it's important. Because I think it affects our everyday life. And how does this affect our relationship with God? Well, because it affects our everyday life. And so what infuriates me is when I hear pastors basically mock this idea. When I hear pastors, mockingly allude to this kind of stuff that is out in the world, but then we'll put there just this traditional, or this I don't know the right word, legalistic spin on it, where it's a bunch of garbage. Don't pay attention to that stuff. Let's just focus on Jesus. What? Like, what does that even mean? Millions of Christians right now are having encounters and having experiences with stuff that the church won't even address. And the response that the church is let's just focus on Jesus. Like, let's not talk about it. Let's not think about it. Let's not pay attention to it. The world will be the world. And it's like, that both infuriates me and it breaks my heart, and it causes me to just do what I'm doing. And so what's the solution? Like, what do we do with this? How does this draw people to Jesus? Well, I want to say this. Looking at where our world is going and seeing how our culture is becoming more and more secular, more and more anti-God, how Christianity particularly is under attack. I just read a thing talking about how the Bible most likely will become outlawed at some point in the near future. Not any other religious book, just the Bible. And then if that happens, then any talk of Jesus will be banned or outlawed. Not any other God, false God, just talking about Jesus. And so when we see our world and our culture going that way, and we see all of these things that are happening in government, in politics, in the unseen realm, in our culture, things that are going to affect our everyday life, things that are affecting Christians, This is why we have to talk about it. Because people's faith is going to be challenged. Because as time goes on and as the church gets more and more squeezed from culture, the more the faith of the church is going to be tested. And I think, and as I said this in a previous episode, if the church is not prepared to handle what's coming, there's going to be a lot of people's faith is going to be shattered. There's going to be so many cracks in the foundation of people's faith, because they're going to start, I guarantee you, we're going to start seeing things. I mean, we're seeing it right now. Just the church is choosing to not talk about it, but eventually we're going to get to a place where you can't ignore it anymore. It's just going to be there. And it's at that moment that it's like people are going to be forced to like have a wake-up call, but their faith is it. We're going to discover the lack of faith that people actually had. When comfortable Christianity, when the bubble of comfortable Christianity gets popped, we're going to see how true people actually were, how true to God they were, how real their faith was. Because it's coming. And we're going to get into all of these separate things. Like I want to do a whole bunch, at least a few episodes on transhumanism. I do want to talk about government deception and the elites and, people running the world from behind the scenes. Like that stuff, again, it's just not conspiracy anymore. And I want to talk about aliens again, because that's another thing that keeps coming up in the media, in the world. And so we're going to get into all of that. But it's these kind of topics that if you're not ready for, and you have no paradigm for that, like pretty much 99% of the church doesn't, at least the church that I've been around in my 40 years on the earth, it's going to be very scary for people. And so my heart is, I just want people to be aware, Christians to be aware of what's happening out there, of not just turning a blind eye, not being ignorant, not being naive. Because this is why. This is why I'm talking about this stuff. This is why I think it's important. This is why, or this is how it's going to grow our faith in the Lord. Yeah, I think I could keep rambling on about this, but I think I've made my point. I don't know if this made sense at all, but we're going to stop right there. So I hope you hear my heart. I hope you see my heart. I hope those of you who've been following me for a while, you see the change. You get some perspective into where I'm coming from and why I'm doing what I'm doing now and why I'm passionate about it. That's my heart. I just want people to become aware of what's really going on out there. And I'm not saying I know. I'm just scratching the surface myself. But I want to take people along this journey with me, because our paradigms need to be smashed and put back together for where culture is going and what's coming down the pipe for Christians. That's my heart. And so that's why it's important. And this is how it helps our faith grow and why, and how it helps our relationship with Jesus. Because, well, that's it for episode 14. Thanks so much for listening. Again, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, you can email me. You can leave a comment on one of my YouTube videos, Instagram or TikTok reels from this podcast when I put it out there. All the links to all that stuff is in the description below. And so, engage with me. Let's chat. Let's connect. And thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. Have an awesome rest of your day or evening. Much love and God bless.